Ukraine. So members of Congress continue to push for greater involvement in the U.S. involvement in Ukraine. Some, like Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who we talked about here on the show, have called for us to basically all out just use nuclear war. Like, hey, we just got to use nuclear weapons to stop Russia, as if that's not crazy enough. So then over the weekend, we have Delaware Congressman Chris Coons, who is Joe Biden's self-appointed lackey, his replacement for his Senate seat, who is out of Delaware. And, you know, of course, if you're a warmonger like Joe Biden, and you have a history of warmongering like Joe Biden, you would want to replace yourself with an equally sycophantic warmonger. And that's exactly who we got in Chris Coons, one of the most powerful senators in the United States government. He took to the Sunday show, and he was specifically asked about U.S. troop involvement on the ground in Ukraine. And she gave him an opportunity, I think, to clarify his position on this. But now this growing chorus of members of Congress who are calling for U.S. boots on the ground. Listen to Chris Coons from Delaware. If I can actually hit this button.
Clayton's mouse is...
This mouse never works. And
in some public remarks this week, you said the country needs to talk about when it might be willing to send troops to Ukraine. You said if the answer is never, then we are inviting another level of escalation and brutality by Putin. Are you arguing that President Biden was wrong when he said he would not send troops to Ukraine? Are you asking him to set a red line?
Margaret, I think those of us in Congress who have a critical role in setting foreign policy and in advising the president in terms of his decisions as commander-in-chief need to look clearly at the level of brutality. This is a moment of enormous challenge for all of us. And I deeply respect President Biden's leadership in pulling together the West, in imposing crushing sanctions on Russia, and in bringing to this fight countries that had stayed on the sidelines before. I think President Biden's leadership has been steady and constructive, but this is a critical moment. If Vladimir Putin, who has shown us how brutal he can be, is allowed to just continue to massacre civilians, to commit war crimes throughout Ukraine, without NATO, without the West coming more forcefully to his aid, I deeply worry that what's going to happen next is that we will see Ukraine turn into Syria. The American people cannot turn away from this tragedy in Ukraine. I think the history of the 21st century turns on how fiercely we defend freedom in Ukraine, and that Putin will only stop when we stop him.
But what did we do? I mean, okay, thank you for mentioning Syria. Syria is still pretty terrible. So what are we going to do about that in the meantime, right? It's like, oh, that's a sunk cost. You know, people's lives were torn apart. The country's torn apart. That's fine how that is, right? And so we don't want that to happen. We did let it happen. But now let's just not let it happen again, even though our marching orders are the same. Like there's a flawed logic there.
Well, there's a flawed logic all through Washington. I mean, that we are going to send U.S. boots on the ground, U.S. forces. By the way, let's not even pretend that we don't already have U.S. forces there. We already know, as we reported last week here on the show, French journalists who've confirmed that U.S. soldiers are there, in fact, directing traffic, leading the way. When you come in and you're joining up forces there, they're in charge. And journalists are saying that's exactly what's happening there. So maybe we can just get over this like facade that U.S. troops aren't really there. But this would be like a full-on, here we go, we're going to have an invasion force, basically, of U.S. troops. Because
well, it does feel like they've been warming us to it, right? And so the Pentagon has been refusing to set up this no-fly zone while politicians continue to push, like, actually, we think it's fine. And then some boots on the ground. Well, we originally said we wouldn't do that, but now we think it's kind of fine. Nuclear weapons pointed towards us. Let's point it right back. We think that would be fine. So it does seem like it's sort of inching its way into full invasion when we were told that it would only be monetary support and support with weapons, right? Which I guess we're all supposed to think sounds better.
I don't know. Here's Chris Coons, though, by the way. Here's what Glenn Greenwald points out. Chris Coons is a 58-year-old. He's a graduate of Yale Law School with a $10 million net worth. He never served in the military. He has 3 children, all 18 or older, yet none of them serve in the military. So when he advocates that the U.S. send troops to fight Russia in Ukraine, he means other families.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very easy to say, and this is how U.S. wars are fought in the United States now, because we don't have a draft, right? So, it's not a sampling of every American has to go to fight war. No, it's conscripts. It's people who who decide to volunteer to be in the army, to be in the military, who otherwise don't have access, perhaps, to upwardly mobile opportunities in their life, right?
Well, to one end, though, I mean, we were so over the last week, media theorist Noam Chomsky has given an interview, which people sort of are up in arms about, because he talks about how the United States has a history of aggression and arming the bad guys and pretending like they're doing right when they're doing wrong. It's very gaslighting to the whole world, really. And so what will come of this, right? When we send people to die there for something that we won't really get what we want anyway, which is Russia to disappear from that region and for the Western imperialism to just make itself at home there, like sit down comfortably on the couch in Ukraine and spread their own ideals and money and guns and debt and all of those things, right? So I guess what the problem is here is that you can think Russia is doing a bad thing by going into a country that it was not welcomed and enacting violence on people who do not want them there. Yes, but you can also think that the United States is doing a bad thing by sending copious amounts of weapons and money into a place that does not have an active military anymore, that is now military and civilians. And to what end?
I mean, never did I think we would live in a world where pushing for peace, saving us from World War III would be mocked online by like blue check liberals, people who've changed their Twitter avatars to have a Ukrainian flag in their Twitter handle. I got into an argument on Friday with a guy who literally...
A Twitter argument?
Yeah, I mean, he literally jumped... I was making an argument about the New York Times being caught again reporting fake news. And this guy with a Ukrainian flag in his Twitter handle says, "Well, man, I can't understand how you went full MAGA." Like, what are you talking about? I'm talking about New York Times reports a fake story, is caught again lying, and you're calling me MAGA. Like, what the hell are you talking about? It's this whataboutism. And Noam Chomsky was asked about this. He says, we're in this world now where if you challenge these things, these ideas like of World War III or using nuclear weapons, it's what about Hitler?
Yes.
Or what about, and then it completely defeats the argument. I never thought we'd live in a world where you have to like defend that you don't want World War III, and that's yet what we have right now. Something interesting did unfold this weekend, and it just goes to show you like what's truly going on in Ukraine.
Well, someone in the chat says, well, what do we do then, right? And in this interview, Noam Chomsky makes the point that we could negotiate, give Putin something we don't want to give him so that he actually removes himself from this area and people stop dying. But we don't seem willing to do that. The West has already dug its heels in and seems to have a policy of we will fight down to the last Ukrainian, which costs lives that are not ours, right?
What he did this weekend, I mean, is interesting. I mean, what he did in this interview with Current Affairs Magazine, I'll put up here. I encourage all of you to go read it. Do me a favor. Do not do what so many people on Twitter do, which is they don't even know what the story is, and they jump on the bandwagon of criticism. They don't know what they're talking about. Read the whole interview, because it really gives you a broad understanding of his thinking, the way that Noam Chomsky has thought about anti-war for his whole life. It's a really great interview. I encourage you to go to read it. Don't fall victim to what some of these Twitter blue check marks do. But anyway,
I wanted to also point out.
Oh, David.
Sorry. I also wanted to point out that no matter what, like if you counter any of these mainstream narratives, you're automatically right wing too. I've seen it. It's like you're automatically a right wing person if you question the narrative, and that's another bad thing that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, You see this with Russell Brand and Joe Rogan, they're not right wing at all. I mean, they're left, but who cares? They're labeled this way. Well, what happened is that Noam Chomsky told the truth about the war, basically, this weekend. He's an esteemed professor. He's an anti-war activist. He was interviewed in this Current Affairs magazine piece.
He's a media theorist that media students have been studying for decades. I myself had many semesters of Chomsky.
So he basically said the U.S. position is to use Ukraine as cannon fodder to further its aims, and that we will have to, quote, fight to the last Ukrainian rather than pursue peace. Oh, no, he didn't. Did he really just say that? Did he really just tell the truth? Exactly what we've been saying here on this show? Like, that's what's going to happen. Because Ukraine will be leveled. Everyone will be killed because we are fighting this proxy war.
Because why else would Western powers be refusing to speak to Putin? He's willing to speak to Macron. He is willing to speak to Western leaders, right? But we won't do it. Why, right? Why not just speak? And when asked about it, Biden was like, I can't deal with that guy now. He's irrational, right?
Peace? Forget that. I can't do it. I got too much war to deal with here. I can't be speaking peace.
Right.
So, all of this posturing is hilarious. And so people flipped out about it because of that specific quote where they said, we will fight to the last Ukrainian, that's what the U.S. position will be rather than pursue peace. All these people flipped out on Twitter and had a bunch of different things to say about it. If I can get my fucking mouse to work, sorry.
Easy.
Here we go. Noam Chomsky, that right-wing Noam Chomsky guy.
Noah Smith says on Twitter, Noam Chomsky is very eager to surrender on behalf of a country he'll never have to set foot in. Notice the bunny rabbit and Ukrainian flag and blue check mark. Let's see, what else do we had here? Oh, here's another one. Sorry. I have a bunch of tweets that I can't all of a sudden find now. Damn it. Sorry. Oh, yeah, here we go. Chomsky is Elon Musk for leftists. Whatever that means. Here's another one. Yeah, what? Here's another person supports Ukraine with the Ukrainian flag. I'm going to say it. Since folks been saying it about a woman 5 years younger than him, Chomsky's brain is deteriorating. Probably has been for a while, and he should retire from public life stat.
Okay, listen here, a DT.
Yeah, listen here, a DT.
Okay, I have a problem with that because when you read this article, it reads to me as something that all of us should aspire to. And Chomsky is in his 90s, right? He has kept a close eye on the media for decades. He has trained hundreds of millions of students who have read his work and aspire to have that kind of global context. And he is saying that, look, I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of wars come and go. I know what people in power say in order to garner support for their war. And I know that war usually ends up being something that was drummed up for other people's causes, and people get hurt for following those causes. And he also says, I have seen enough people in American politics act on their own behalf rationally, but violently, specifically Nixon, who said, like, go blow up everything in Cambodia, right? He was, and so we should all aspire to be that guy after decades of living and paying attention, that you realize, he comes off to me not as at all senile, but more like a Marcus Aurelius at the end of his life. Like I've seen a lot.
Right.
Yes, I'm battle tested. This will not end well. And in fact, I was reading a Substack by someone named Freddie DeBoer today, who talked about, like, what is the crime of Noam Chomsky saying these things? That, look, guys, this usually plays out this way, is we kind of like get ourselves, is this the one that I...
Yeah, Freddie DeBoer, okay. This is what you're referring to. Says, I think supporting Ukraine in 2022 has become like supporting the troops in 2002 because people are desperate for a morally simplistic contest in which the goodies will nobly defeat the dastardly baddies. Americans grow up surrounded by World War II nostalgia and feel denied their birthright of ethically uncomplicated and heroic wars. And by the way, so Noam Chomsky then was this weekend, he was on, he did an interview with The Intercept, kind of following up on this current affairs interview, and he was asked to sort of clarify some things. And he says, look, there's only two ways wars end. Two ways. Two ways. We've never yet had another way. Listen to his response.
It's not quite the right question. The right question is, what is the best thing to do to save Ukraine from a grim fate, from further destruction? And that's to move towards a negotiated settlement. There are some simple facts that aren't really controversial. There are two ways for a war to end. One way is for one side or the other to be basically destroyed. And the Russians are not going to be destroyed. So that means one way is for Ukraine to be destroyed. The other way is some negotiated settlement. If there's a third way, no one's ever figured it out. So,
Right?
Right.
I mean, does that sound like a senile person? No.
Yeah, I definitely thought that was just absolute senility. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, that guy's totally demented, right?
Well, this Freddie DeBoer in his Substack, he says many American observers will grow frustrated with the lack of progress, meaning that we can cheer for and click many headlines that shows Ukrainians pushing Russia back, but they're not being pushed back far enough for us to think rationally about it as if like it's an intruder in your house and you just give them the guest room. That's not how this is working. And so Americans will grow frustrated with this lack of progress, find their attention pulled elsewhere, eventually quietly scrubbing the Ukrainian flag from their social media bios for fear of appearing behind the times, right? So eventually we'll get tired of this because we don't keep up outrage over Syria or Yemen or any of these places. The fickle American imagination will turn to other things, and the future of Ukraine, even in an optimistic vision where they resist any substantial permanent capture of land by the Russians, will still be unsettled, still saddled with a weak central government, endemic corruption, a virulent strain of ultra-nationalist far-right sentiment, and the consequences of now being stuffed full of foreign arms and ordnance. And I, for one, still feel like the fact that because you may have lived in Ukraine when this happened, you had to be separated from your family if you were a man of fighting age, and men were not given the choice, right? You have to stay and fight for man-made borders and man-made ethnicity, and we don't care that your family will go away for you. And these are the things we all should, as humans, be given choices about, right? And there's no outrage on behalf of those people at all. There's
I think if the media would cover this like they covered Vietnam, because they covered Vietnam showing pictures of caskets coming home with flags on it. People were invested in that war because the media was all over it. They had 1 million people show up protesting the war because we knew what was going on. And right now it's like they hide everything, and when they do cover it, they cover it like it's a sports show where they're covering the power of the Jets and this and that, and they make it all, fantasize for people that are into that kind of thing. But it's like they don't cover it in a way that lets us know exactly what's going on, because if we knew,
right,
nobody would want it.
Well, we learned our lesson about how to cover wars, right? Now we don't show the body bags. We learned our lesson in with the Iraq War, right? We tie yellow ribbons around trees, and we don't show the bodies coming home. If we do, we have the president at Dover Air Force Base doing like a little meet and greet, and once in a while. But for the most part, we don't see that anymore. It's a prophylactic war.
Well, that and like when like with where they sort of went during the Iraq War, where they started making like the rock music montages of like our jets and stuff like that, to where it became like that sports, like get hyped about this war kind of stuff. It's like the propaganda was just.
It's the America, F yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's really disturbing to me. I mean, we didn't say, and I don't think we said enough about the Chris Coons interview this weekend. I mean, you have a sitting U.S. senator, ranked 15th, one of the strongest U.S. senators, who is actively saying boots on the ground, American soldiers, at you can say it however you want, as NATO forces in Ukraine. Like, enough is enough. Enough of these people being sent off to be killed for your proxy wars, for the military-industrial complex, for us to further some ridiculous imperialistic aims. And there's enough people. I mean, the responses to him were amazing on Twitter. Look, good for him. It's what should have happened weeks ago.
Good for Chris Coons?
Yeah, good for Chris Coons. Here's another one. Kate Clemency. It's about time someone got courage. Sunflower. Thank you. Yeah, it's about time someone got courage.
I mean,
let's go in.
Okay, but is it courage, right, to surround China, for instance, as Noam Chomsky says in this interview, with countries who are sort of at our beck and call that we can infiltrate with weapons, right? So if China acts up in a way we don't like, we'll know that now Biden doesn't use the word, what is the word? Covered or something. He uses instead the words, like we don't use, I don't remember the words, surrounded or something like that. Like we place weapons, or it's like a guy who just goes and like pumps up his muscles so that maybe he won't have to feel pain, right? That's what the United States is like. Like if we just have enough weapons, if we just have enough, cyber weapons, if we just make ourselves strong enough, then you're safer. And the rest of us are just, we have to accept that because we're tax-paying Americans, and that's the way of things, right? We get no choice.
That's right. That's how we do it. And, Chris Coons, warmonger, taking over for warmonger Biden, and that's what you get.
Well, I mean, if you don't stand for this, then, you should take a good look at what it does have bipartisan support. Whether you like it or not, it's right now Democrats war.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
war
U.S. involvement and sending more. And by the way, like I was going to show this, like this is not reported at all, but here are some videos surfacing just last night. In the Donbass region, where hundreds of American Humvees and tanks and other weapons have been found.
Здесь, на территории завода Ильича,
these are all American Humvees, clearly American Humvees, being basically stripped for parts there in the Donbass region. And these are Ukrainian soldiers who are there taking these different things apart. Again, think about the amount of American equipment that's there, just pumped into this region, just sitting there.
And think about how they do this now. They don't paint it as war anymore because like the American people that are on board with this, it's because they feel like they're part of a humanitarian crisis. You know what I mean? Right. So they don't paint it as this is a war. This is a humanitarian crisis. This over here is a humanitarian crisis. We got to help the people of Venezuela get food. We got to help the people of Ukraine from Russia. So it's like they don't even call it war anymore.
No, and it's also, and if you speak out about it on social media, you'll be censored. We had the story, we kind of talked about it before the show, but it's now been confirmed that YouTube is actively just deleting videos that question sort of the NATO narrative about what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like you have reporters who are actively on the ground saying, no, what we're seeing here is different than this narrative you're getting. Delete. Like YouTube is deleting this stuff.
Right.
This is what people are getting. This is,
Well, did you see that story of that journalist that's missing?
No.
There's a journalist that's been covering this stuff very accurately from the ground, and they feel like he was probably because he was supposed to be on a couple of interviews over the weekend, and he never showed up. So they're thinking that he's been taken by Zelensky's
for goodness sakes.
squad. Yeah.
All right.
And he was doing a lot of really great coverage on the ground for us.
Well, we'll try to get that story here on the show tomorrow if we can.